My name is Nicole Chen,
Don't let anyone
and I'm
treat you
34
like a
years
rough
old.
draft.
My nephew Tyler was dying in the ICU while my sister Jessica went shopping with my husband Brad. That's how it always was with Jessica. The kid could be coding, and she'd be worried about missing a sale at Nordstrom while planning her next rendezvous. I found myself pacing outside Tyler's room for the 15th time that day, watching him sleep through the glass window. Those machines beeped steadily, tubes snaking from his small arms like he was some kind of science experiment. He was 11 years old and looked like he weighed maybe 70 pounds soaking wet. The bacterial meningitis had hit him like a freight train, and for 2 solid weeks, we genuinely weren't sure he'd survive. Greg, his stepfather, sat in the chair beside Tyler's bed reading to him from Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Even though Tyler was unconscious, sedated to help his brain heal, Greg read to him anyway. He'd been doing it every single day since Tyler was admitted. Greg had been more of a father to Tyler than anyone else in the kid's life, even though he and Jessica had divorced 3 years earlier. Most ex-husbands would have walked away, especially when the kid wasn't biologically theirs. But not Greg. He'd shown up every single day. Jessica, Tyler's actual biological mother, wasn't even in the building. Again, 4 months earlier, my sister had shown up at my Seattle townhouse door looking like something out of a designer disaster movie. Greg had left her with minimal financial support after their divorce. He'd made absolutely sure she understood what abandoning her responsibilities meant. The divorce had been brutal. He'd discovered she was having multiple affairs, spending their savings on luxury items while neglecting Tyler, and generally being the kind of person who shouldn't be responsible for a houseplant, let alone a child. I thought I was being noble when I opened my home to her while she got back on her feet. I thought I was being a good sister, showing family loyalty, doing what family does. Looking back, that might have been my biggest mistake. Where's his mother? Dr. Patel asked when she made her morning rounds, her dark eyes scanning the room and finding only Greg and me. Out, I said, trying desperately to keep the edge out of my voice. She'll be back eventually. Dr. Patel raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow but didn't push it. She'd learned over the past 2 weeks that Greg and I were the ones who actually knew Tyler's medical history. We knew his medication allergies, he was allergic to sulfa drugs. We knew his fears, he was terrified of needles but would be brave if you let him squeeze someone's hand. We knew what made him laugh, stupid knock-knock jokes and videos of cats doing silly things. Jessica knew what size shoes to buy him. Maybe, if you gave her 3 tries and a helpful sales associate. Tyler had been in the pediatric ICU at Seattle Children's Hospital for exactly 14 days with severe bacterial meningitis. His fever had spiked to 105.3 degrees at its worst. The infection had been so severe that the doctors weren't sure if he'd have permanent brain damage, hearing loss, or worse. They'd told us to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best, which is basically doctor speak for, we have no idea what's going to happen. And through all of it, through the spinal taps, through the seizures, through the moments when his fever wouldn't break and we thought we were losing him, Jessica treated it like an inconvenient interruption to her social calendar. She'd stop by for maybe 30 minutes, take a selfie with Tyler looking sick in the background for her Instagram, caption it something like, "Praying for my baby boy, folded hands, 2 hearts, #momlife, #stay strong," and then disappear to meet my husband Brad for coffee. Yeah, coffee, that's what they called it. I'd see the texts sometimes when Brad's phone lit up on the kitchen counter. "Meet me at the usual place? Can't wait to see you. She's at the hospital again, we have time." Looking back, I don't know why I didn't confront them immediately. Maybe I was in denial. Maybe I was too focused on Tyler surviving to process my own betrayal. Maybe I just didn't want to believe that my sister and my husband were capable of something so calculatedly cruel. "Aunt Nicole?" Tyler's voice was barely a whisper, raspy from the breathing treatments and the intubation tube they'd removed just yesterday. I was by his bedside in an instant, taking his small hand in mine. "Hey, buddy, how are you feeling?" "Tired," he admitted, his brown eyes struggling to focus. "Really tired. Did Mom come today?" And there it was, the question that broke my heart every single time. Another lie formed on my lips automatically, easily, like I'd been practicing. "She'll be here soon, sweetie. She just had some errands to run." Errands. That's what I was calling my sister's affair with my husband. Errands. Greg looked at me over Tyler's head, and I saw everything I was feeling reflected in his expression. Frustration, anger, deep, bone-tired sadness that this kid kept asking for a mother who couldn't be bothered to show up for him. "I'm here, though," I said, squeezing Tyler's hand gently. "And Greg's here." We're not going anywhere. I know, Tyler said, and his voice was so small, so young, so heartbreakingly resigned. You guys always come. Those 4 words, you guys always come, hit me like a physical blow. An 11-year-old shouldn't have to be grateful that adults in his life were doing the bare minimum of showing up. That should be the default, not the exception. The nurse came in to check Tyler's vitals, and her smile was genuine and encouraging. His fever's down to 99.2, she said, marking something on her tablet. That's real, significant progress. Dr. Patel is talking about moving him out of ICU in the next day or 2 if this continues. For the first time in 2 weeks, I felt something that wasn't just grinding anxiety and exhaustion. I felt actual hope. Tyler was going to make it through this. He was going to survive. What I didn't know then was that his recovery was just the beginning of our real story. The story of how families break apart and come back together in completely different configurations. The story of how sometimes the people who are supposed to love you most are the ones who hurt you deepest. And the story of how showing up, just being present, is sometimes the most radical act of love there is. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Brad, working late tonight. Don't wait up for dinner. I looked at the message and felt absolutely nothing. No disappointment, no anger, just a kind of cold, clinical detachment. Because I knew exactly what working late meant. It meant he was meeting Jessica somewhere. It meant they were continuing whatever sick affair they'd been carrying on while Tyler fought for his life just blocks away. But I didn't have the energy to deal with it right then. Tyler needed me present, focused, here. The betrayal would have to wait. I'll stay tonight, Greg said quietly, settling back into his chair. You should go home, get some real sleep in a real bed. Are you sure? I asked, even though I was dead on my feet. I'm sure. Go home, shower, sleep for more than 2 hours. I've got him. I looked at this man who had every reason to walk away from this situation. Divorced from Tyler's mother, no biological connection to the child, no legal obligation whatsoever, and who had instead chosen to show up every single day for 2 straight weeks. Thank you, I said, and the words felt inadequate for what he was doing. He's my kid, Greg said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Biology doesn't change that. I drove home that night through Seattle's evening traffic, and I couldn't stop thinking about those words. Biology doesn't change that. Greg had chosen Tyler. He decided this kid was his family, regardless of DNA, regardless of divorce paperwork, regardless of how difficult Jessica made everything. Meanwhile, Jessica, Tyler's actual biological mother, the woman who'd carried him for 9 months and given birth to him, couldn't be bothered to sit in a hospital room for more than 30 minutes. My townhouse was dark when I pulled into the driveway at 8:47 p.m. Brad's car wasn't there, which meant he was still working late. Jessica's rental car was parked on the street, which meant she was home. Probably binge-watching reality TV shows and painting her nails, completely unconcerned about her son in the ICU. I walked into the house, and sure enough, Jessica was sprawled on my couch watching some show about rich housewives throwing drinks at each other. Oh hey, she said casually, not even looking away from the screen. How's Tyler? Like she was asking about the weather. Like her son hadn't been critically ill for 2 weeks. He's improving, I said, my voice flat. His fever's down. They might move him out of ICU tomorrow. That's great, Jessica said brightly, still not looking at me. See? I told you he'd be fine. Kids bounce back from everything. Like bacterial meningitis was a common cold. Like we hadn't spent 2 weeks wondering if Tyler would survive, and if he did, whether he'd have permanent brain damage. Where were you today? I asked, even though I knew the answer. Oh, around, Jessica said vaguely, waving her hand dismissively. Had some appointments. Needed to take care of some things. Appointments. Yeah, you know, errands and stuff. She finally looked at me, and there wasn't even a hint of guilt in her expression. Just mild annoyance that I was interrupting her show. Why? Did something happen with Tyler? Did something happen? Her son was in the ICU, and she was asking if something happened. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her. I wanted to demand how she could be so callously indifferent to her own child's suffering. But I was too tired. Too wrung out. Too focused on Tyler's recovery to fight with Jessica about her complete failure as a mother. No, I said, nothing happened. I'm going to shower and sleep. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, and I could hear Jessica turn the TV volume back up behind me. Not a care in the world. Not a single concern for her critically ill child. I stood in the shower for a long time, letting the hot water run over me, and I made a decision without fully realizing it. When this was over, when Tyler was out of the hospital and safe, I was going to have to face some hard truths about my sister, my husband, and what I was willing to tolerate in the name of family loyalty. But that confrontation would come later. For now, Tyler needed me. And I was going to show up for him the way his own mother couldn't. Because that's what family actually does. The thing about catching your sister with your husband is that nothing prepares you for the specific flavor of that betrayal. Movies don't capture it. Books don't do it justice. It's a particular kind of nausea mixed with disbelief mixed with a strange, detached clarity where everything suddenly makes horrible sense. I came home early on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days after Tyler had been moved out of ICU into a regular pediatric room. His recovery was progressing well, better than anyone had dared to hope. The doctors were talking about discharge in another week. Greg had insisted he could handle the afternoon shift alone, and I desperately needed a shower, clean clothes, and maybe a 2-hour nap in my own bed. I was actually excited as I pulled into my driveway at 2:15 p.m. Excited to feel clean. Excited to sleep horizontally for more than 90 minutes. Excited that Tyler was going to be okay. The house was quiet when I walked in, which should have been my first red flag. Jessica's rental car was parked in the driveway, but she wasn't in her usual spot on the living room couch, surrounded by empty Diet Coke cans and reality TV shows. Then I heard it, that unmistakable sound that makes your stomach drop to your feet and your vision narrow to a pinpoint. The rhythmic creaking of bed springs. Gasping breaths. Those sounds that you know, immediately and instinctively, even if you've never heard them in this particular context before. And here's the thing that really gets me, I actually hesitated at the bottom of the stairs. I stood there, one hand on the banister, thinking maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. Maybe there was some innocent explanation for why my sister was in my house while those sounds were coming from my bedroom. Because that's what good people do, right? We give everyone the benefit of the doubt, even when the doubt is paper thin and transparent. But then I heard Brad laugh. That specific laugh he only did during sex. The one I hadn't heard directed at me in probably 8 months. A laugh I'd actually missed, stupidly, naively, while he was apparently saving it for my sister. I walked up those stairs, and with each step, I felt something fundamental shifting inside me. Not just anger, not just hurt, but a kind of cold, crystalline clarity that comes when you finally see something you've been deliberately not seeing. I pushed open my bedroom door without knocking. Why would I knock? It was my bedroom, in my house, that I paid for. Jessica was on top of Brad, her long auburn hair cascading over her shoulders, catching the afternoon sunlight coming through the windows I'd picked out, in the bedroom I'd decorated, on the bed I'd bought with my own money. Brad's hands were tangled in her hair, and neither of them noticed me at first. They were too busy, too involved, too completely unconcerned with the woman who'd been supporting both of them. Well, I said, and my voice sounded remarkably calm even to my own ears. This explains why you've been so understanding about Tyler's hospital bills. They both froze. It would have been almost comical, like a pause button on a particularly horrifying movie, if it wasn't my actual life. Jessica rolled off Brad with surprising grace, pulling my expensive sheets around herself like some kind of post-coital toga. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed, like I was the one being inappropriate by walking into my own bedroom. Nicole, she started, and her tone was the same one you'd use to explain something to a not very bright child. We didn't want you to find out like this. Oh? I walked further into the room, and I was genuinely impressed by how steady my voice remained. How exactly did you want me to find out? Were you planning a tasteful PowerPoint presentation? Maybe a nice card from Hallmark? Sorry about the affair, hope your nephew doesn't die. Brad finally found his voice, scrambling to pull on his pants with all the dignity of a guilty teenager. Nicole, listen, we can explain. No, I held up my hand. I don't want to hear it. I especially don't want to hear it from either of you in my bed, wearing my sheets, in my house that I pay for while both of you contribute absolutely nothing. Jessica had the nerve to look affronted. Don't be so dramatic, Nicole. These things happen. It's not like we planned it. These things happen. Like adultery was weather. Like betrayal was just something that occurred naturally, completely beyond anyone's control, like rain or traffic. You're right, I said, and I could hear the dangerous edge creeping into my voice. These things do happen. And now other things are going to happen. Like both of you getting out of my house in exactly 20 minutes. You can't just throw us out, Jessica protested, still wrapped in my sheets like some kind of trashy Cleopatra. I have nowhere to go. You invited me to stay here. I stared at her, really looked at her. This woman who'd abandoned her dying son to fuck my husband was now complaining that she didn't have other housing options. You should have thought about that, I said slowly, carefully, before you decided my bedroom was a good place for your midlife crisis. And that's when Jessica said the words that severed whatever sisterly bond we had left. The words that made it clear this wasn't just an affair, it was a competition she thought she was winning. What did you expect, Nicole? She looked me up and down with barely disguised contempt. I can't help it if I'm better than you. Brad wants someone who can actually satisfy him. Someone who's not so uptight and boring. Even Brad looked uncomfortable with that one. He paused in buttoning his shirt, glancing between us like he was trying to figure out how badly he'd miscalculated. But he didn't contradict her. He didn't defend me. He just stood there, half-dressed in my bedroom, while my sister explained why their betrayal was actually my fault for not being good enough. Get out, I said quietly. Both of you. Now, Nicole, Brad started. You have 20 minutes to pack whatever you absolutely need and get out of my house. Anything you leave behind will be on the curb by tonight. Your choice. Jessica stood up, still wrapped in my sheets, her face flushing red. You're going to regret this. You're going to be all alone, and we'll be happy together. I'm already alone, I said. I've been alone this entire time. I just didn't realize it until now. The only difference is now I won't have to pay for the privilege of your company. 23 minutes later, because of course they couldn't even follow a simple deadline, Jessica and Brad were packed and standing by my front door with their hastily stuffed suitcases. Jessica had shifted tactics, going from confrontational to pleading. Nicole, please, you're my sister. We can work through this. Family forgives family. Family shows up for family, I said flatly. Family doesn't abandon their sick child in the ICU to screw their sister's husband. You don't get to use the word family anymore. You gave up that right. Brad tried one more time. Nicole, I made a mistake. We both did. But we can fix this. Marriage counseling, or, no, I interrupted. We can't fix this because I don't want to. You know what I realized? I've been unhappy for years, and I just kept telling myself that's what marriage was. Compromise. Sacrifice. But it's not supposed to be you sacrificing everything while your partner sacrifices nothing. I opened the front door. Cool Seattle afternoon air rushed in. Get out, both of you, and don't come back. They left. Jessica shot me one last look, part anger, part disbelief that I was actually going through with this. Brad looked pathetic, like a kid who'd gotten caught stealing and couldn't quite believe he had to face consequences. I watched them load their suitcases into Brad's car. Watched them drive away together, probably already spinning their narrative about how I was the unreasonable one, how I'd overreacted, how they were the real victims here. Then I closed the door, locked it, and stood in my suddenly quiet house. And that's when I started laughing. Not happy laughter, not relieved laughter, but the slightly unhinged laughter of someone who's just realized they've been living in a completely different reality than they thought. But here's what they didn't take when they left: Tyler. Because that night, when Greg called from the hospital to let me know Tyler was asking if his mom was coming for their nightly reading session, I had to tell him the truth. Jessica won't be coming, I said. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not anymore. What happened? Greg asked carefully. I caught her with Brad. In my bed. I kicked them both out. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Then, Jesus, Nicole. I'm so sorry. Don't be. I should have seen it coming. But listen, Tyler needs stability right now. He needs to know someone's going to be there. I'm coming back to the hospital. You just got home. I'll be there in 30 minutes. And I was. Because showing up is what matters. Not biology, not legal obligations, not complicated family dynamics. Just showing up. Every single time. That night, I sat in Tyler's hospital room while he slept, and I made phone calls. To a divorce lawyer. To a family law attorney. To my bank to separate accounts. Because this wasn't just about an affair anymore. This was about a child who needed someone to actually fight for him. Someone to choose him deliberately, consciously, consistently. And I was going to be that person. Tyler stirred in his sleep, and I reached out to hold his hand. I've got you, I whispered. I'm not going anywhere. I had no idea what I was signing up for. No idea how hard the next few months would be, how many battles I'd have to fight, how much my life was about to change. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: Tyler deserved better than Jessica. Better than Brad. Better than people who only showed up when it was convenient. He deserved someone who would choose him, no matter what. And that was going to be me. The King County Family Court building smells like old coffee, broken promises, and industrial cleaner trying desperately to mask both. I'd never been inside one before last Tuesday, but there I was at 34 years old, filing for divorce and simultaneously petitioning for permanent guardianship of a kid who wasn't legally mine. The lawyer I'd hired looked like she could negotiate with dragons and win. Margaret Wu was 52, 5'4", with sharp eyes behind designer glasses and the kind of confidence that comes from 3 decades of courtroom victories. "Walk me through this again," Margaret said, sitting across from me in her downtown Seattle office with its view of Elliott Bay. "Your sister is agreeing to relinquish custody?" "She signed the papers yesterday," I said, sliding the notarized documents across her desk. "Didn't even read them. She was too eager to start her new life with Brad." Margaret flipped through the pages, her expression giving nothing away. "Interesting. Most mothers fight tooth and nail to keep custody, even ones who've been neglectful. The fact that she's signing this so readily tells me everything I need to know about her priorities." "Which are herself, in case that wasn't clear." "Crystal clear." Margaret made some notes on her legal pad. "But this actually makes our job easier. Consensual custody transfers, especially when the child is old enough to express preference, typically move quickly through family court. The question is, what about the father? Tyler's biological father? Unknown," I said. "Jessica has never named him. Tyler's birth certificate lists father as unknown. Jessica claims it was a brief relationship and she has no contact information." "And Gregory Santos? He was married to your sister?" "For 5 years. He and Tyler bonded immediately. Greg's been Tyler's father in every way that matters since Tyler was 6. "But there's no formal adoption?" "No." Jessica refused. She said it was unnecessary, since they were married. Margaret tapped her pen against her notepad. "And now they're divorced, but Mr. Santos is still actively involved?" "He's at the hospital every day. He's paid for Tyler's medical expenses. He's the emergency contact at school. He's more Tyler's father than anyone else has ever been." "That's good," Margaret said. "That shows continuity of care. Courts like stability, especially for children who've been through trauma. Speaking of which, Tyler's medical crisis is going to be relevant here. Do you have documentation of your sister's absence during his hospitalization?" I pulled out a manila folder I'd been compiling. Hospital visitor logs showing I was there 47 out of 14 days, and Greg was there for 42. Jessica visited a total of 8 times for an average of 23 minutes per visit. Margaret's eyebrows rose. "You have specific metrics." "I'm very thorough when I'm angry." "Good. Anger can be productive when properly channeled." "What about financial support? Who's been paying Tyler's medical bills?" "I am. And Greg is. Jessica hasn't contributed anything." "Even better. Courts care about financial responsibility." "Now, the divorce proceedings with your husband. Has he expressed any interest in Tyler's custody situation?" "God, no. Brad barely acknowledged Tyler's existence when we were married. He's not going to suddenly develop paternal instincts now. Speaking of your divorce, Washington is a no-fault state, but documentation of adultery can still impact property division. Do you have evidence?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots I'd saved. Text messages between Brad and Jessica. Credit card statements showing hotel visits. Even a few photos I'd taken when I caught them. Margaret's expression didn't change, but I saw something flash in her eyes. Satisfaction, maybe. Or vindication. "This is substantial. Your husband is not going to walk away with half of everything, I can promise you that. In fact, I think we can argue for you to retain the majority of marital assets based on financial infidelity and the fact that he was essentially unemployed while you supported him." "That's what I was hoping." "Now, about Tyler. Have you spoken to him about this? Does he understand what's happening?" The memory of that conversation still made my chest tight. Tyler had been discharged from the hospital 3 days earlier. We were at my townhouse, his new home, though he didn't fully understand that yet, and I'd sat him down in the living room with hot chocolate and serious conversation. "Tyler," I'd started carefully, "your mom and I need to talk to you about some changes." He'd gone very still, his brown eyes suddenly guarded. At 11, he'd already learned that changes rarely meant anything good. "What kind of changes?" "Your mom has decided she needs to focus on other things right now. She's moving in with Brad, and she thinks it would be better if you stayed here with me for a while." "How long is a while?" This was the hard part. "Permanently, buddy. Your mom is signing papers that give me guardianship." I'd watched him process this, watched emotions flicker across his face. Hurt, confusion, and then, heartbreakingly, relief. "So I'm staying with you? For real?" "Yes, if that's what you want." "What about Greg?" "Greg is going to stay involved. He loves you, and that doesn't change just because he and your mom aren't married anymore." Tyler had been quiet for a long moment. Then, Does mom not want me anymore? How do you answer that question? How do you tell a child that yes, his mother is choosing a new boyfriend over him, but in a way that doesn't completely destroy his ability to trust people? Your mom is dealing with a lot of complicated feelings right now, I'd said carefully, choosing each word like defusing a bomb. Sometimes adults make decisions that hurt kids even when they don't mean to. But what's important is that you have people who do want you, who are committed to being there for you. Me and Greg, we're not going anywhere. Promise? I promise, Tyler. I know this is scary and confusing, but I promise you're safe here. You're wanted here. He'd looked at me with those two old eyes, eyes that had seen too much disappointment already. Okay, I want to stay with you. I told Margaret all of this, and I watched her make notes. The child expressing clear preference is significant, she said. Especially at his age. Courts typically interview children Tyler's age to determine their wishes. From what you're telling me, he's mature enough to understand the situation and express a rational preference. He's 11 going on 30, I said. This illness aged him. Or maybe watching his mother care more about her dating life than his survival aged him. Hard to say. The court date is set for 3 weeks from now, Margaret said. Given that your sister is consenting, and the child has expressed preference, I'd say we have a 95% chance of the guardianship being granted. The bigger fight is going to be your divorce and property division. Brad wants half of everything, doesn't he? His lawyer has indicated as much. They're going to argue that he contributed to the household, supported your career, and is entitled to marital assets. I felt my jaw tighten. He was unemployed for 18 months while I supported him. What exactly did he contribute? That's exactly the argument we're going to make. Plus the adultery, plus the fact that you can prove financial responsibility during the marriage. His lawyer is going to have a hard time justifying his claim. Good. Margaret closed her notepad and looked at me directly. Nicole, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Are you taking custody of Tyler because you genuinely want to be his guardian, or because you're angry at your sister? I didn't have to think about the answer. Both. But mostly because Tyler deserves someone who actually shows up for him. Someone who puts him first. I'm angry at Jessica, yeah, but that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because if I don't, who will? Greg can't get custody as an ex-stepfather with no biological relation. Jessica obviously doesn't want the responsibility. Tyler needs someone, and I'm it. Good answer, Margaret said. Because family court judges can smell revenge custody a mile away, and they hate it. But genuine commitment to a child's welfare? That they respect. Just keep that front and center in your testimony. The custody hearing 3 weeks later was surreal in its efficiency. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Margaret. Jessica's table had only her lawyer, she hadn't even bothered to show up. Judge Patricia Rodriguez looked baffled by the empty chair. The respondent was notified of this hearing? Jessica's lawyer, a tired-looking man in his 50s, stood. Yes, Your Honor, my client was properly served. She chose not to attend. And she's consenting to this guardianship transfer? Yes, Your Honor. My client believes that due to personal circumstances, her son would be better served in his aunt's custody. Judge Rodriguez flipped through the paperwork, her expression growing progressively more disbelieving. Personal circumstances. That's quite a euphemism. She looked at me. Ms. Chen, please stand. You're Tyler Santos's maternal aunt? Yes, Your Honor. And you're petitioning for permanent guardianship? Yes, Your Honor. I was saying. Amanda walked slowly toward where Ramon stood talking with some colleagues from the hospital. I watched as she approached him, saw him notice her, saw his expression shift from surprise to something more guarded. They talked for maybe 2 minutes. Then, Amanda did something that shocked everyone who was watching. She dropped to her knees in front of her son. Please. Her voice carried across the reception hall as conversation stopped and people turned to stare. Please forgive me. I know I don't deserve it. I know I abandoned you when you needed me most, but I'm begging you. Let me try to be part of your life. I need you. The silence was deafening. Every eye in the room was on Ramon, waiting to see what he would do. Ramon looked down at his mother, kneeling at his feet. This woman who'd given birth to him, but never truly mothered him. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, and clearly audible to everyone watching. You don't make me lacking anything, he said quietly. I don't need you in my life. But you are my biological mother, and for that reason alone. I'll give you this. I'll pay for a month at a hotel and give you enough money to get started somewhere else. But I won't support you beyond that. And I won't pretend we have a relationship we've never had. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his checkbook, writing quickly. $10,000. That's more than you ever invested in me, and it's all you'll get. Amanda took the check with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face. Ramon, please use the money to get help. Ramon said, firmly. Find a therapist. Figure out why you run from the people who love you, but leave me in peace. You chose not to be my mother when I needed one. You don't get to choose to be one now when it's convenient for you. After that humiliation, Amanda disappeared again without giving notice. Ramon, Charlie, Marcus, and I continued living our life as family of the heart, showing that family is who we choose to love and has nothing to do with blood ties. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about finding your real family, even when it's not the one you were born with. Sometimes the best families are the ones you build yourself, one choice at a time. As Ramon kissed his bride and the crowd erupted in applause, I caught Charlie's eye across the aisle. He was crying. This tough, steady man who'd chosen to love an abandoned child was crying with joy. Marcus squeezed my hand. Emily's parents beamed with happiness, and Raymond's face was radiant with the kind of joy that comes from being truly completely loved. This was family. This was home. This was what happened when people chose love over convenience, commitment over comfort, showing up over running away. And somewhere in Arizona, Amanda was probably still wondering why her son didn't need her anymore, never understanding that he'd stopped needing her the day she stopped showing up for him. But we understood, and that's all that mattered.